Greater Brockton Health Alliance, and we just wanted to take a few moments to welcome you all. Again, my name is Hillary Lovell. I work for Signature Healthcare, and I am one of the co-chairs of the Greater Brockton Health Alliance. I think many of you in here know that we, along with the Blue Hills and Plymouth Chenaz, have really been looking at taking a regional approach to behavioral health. And so it's wonderful to see so many of you in here today that are coming from those other communities other than just Chenaz 22. So it's wonderful. So again, thank you for coming here today. We have a wonderful presentation that we're going to be turning over to our presenter in just a few moments, but just wanted to take you through a few slides, obviously to welcome you, to show you our vision and our mission. And then we have, this is our service area for the Greater Brockton Health Alliance, and so there's many representatives from those communities in this room today as well. Here's just a general definition of behavioral health, but I think we all may have our own definition of behavioral health, but the way that the Greater Brockton Health Alliance is looking at it is looking at the whole person in the context of the following areas, including but not limited to social determinants of health, which include education, housing, income, and transportation, cultural humility, early intervention and prevention, and physical and social environment, which would be the stigma and cultural barriers.
So, excuse me, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip ahead through some of these slides. As Hillary said, I'm Lauren Bartel. I'm from Old Colony Y, and I am the co-chair of Greater Brockton Health Alliance. So, Greater Brockton Health Alliance is a community health network area. That's what happened there. Which is a DPH initiative to serve our communities and meet the health needs of our communities. Over the years, the focus of Greater Brockton Health Alliance has shifted from physical activity, nutrition, asthma, and oral health to what we're talking about today, behavioral health. And to get here, we've done a lot of activities with many of you who are in the room to really get to the root of what we're trying to address with behavioral health. It is a very complex issue. So we did this 5 Whys activity back in May of 2018 to think about different areas of behavioral health that our communities can address. And from that, we've brought in a few speakers. We've had Dr. Jethwani, who talked about structural racism, and we've had the DA's office talk about ACES, and today we're adding another layer of ACES, which we're really excited about, is how we can overcome those ACES to improve behavioral health in our communities. So this is really the question we've been asking over the past year. What actions can we take together across all of these Greater Brockton Health Alliance communities to improve the health of the people that live there? So I'm actually going to hand it off to Karen McDonald, who's on our steering committee, and she will introduce our speakers for today.
Thank you all for coming here today. Today's my first day back from vacation, so I'm a little... So it was my really great privilege to meet Dr. Bob Sege about 5 or 6 years ago through Dr. Jeff Linkenbach, who many of you guys people know in this room, who does science in the positive. And he says, oh, you have to meet this great pediatrician in Boston who's doing this great work. And we met him and we met for dinner, and we were so overcome with how great this guy was. Like, what, you're having dinner with us? And over the years, as our work has become more and more aligned, and as we've been able to do some more and more work together, I've just become more amazed at the work that he's doing. Dr. Bob Sege is a professor of medicine and pediatrics at Tufts University, and is the director of the Community Engaged Medicine. And he this program is a program to help the medical community to interact with us as we think about the social determinants of health. So not to recreate the wheel, but to engage with the community as a lot of us are doing in the work that we do. He'll be using a lot of the science of the positive framework from Dr. Jeff Linkenbach. He's the lead author on the HOPE study, which is what you guys are going to be talking about today. Again, it's my first day back from healthy outcomes. Bob?
From positive experiences.
From positive experiences, thank you. He met his wife at the first day of medical school and has lived in the Boston area since, and have raised 3 really fantastic kids. He said he's super proud of them, but not to say that, but I will. He's a board member on the Mass Children's Trust Fund, and he's on the Prevent Child Abuse America as a board member as well. So we're really excited to I think you'll really enjoy his presentation. We'll be here till about 12 o'clock. We'll have some time at the end for some questions and answers. And I'd just like to really welcome Dr. Bob Sege. Bob, did I miss anything?
So thank you, Karen, thank you so much for the introduction, and it's really a pleasure to be here in Brockton. And I take just one moment to put my slides up. In just a little bit so you know what to expect. Okay. Big moment, hold your breath until the PowerPoint works.
I think it's the second one, bottom one.
Okay. Oh, there you go. If I click on the right one, does it work better? Okay. So I just want to let you guys know a little bit what to expect. First of all, there's no microphone. So if you're sitting in the back and you can't hear me because my voice is not too loud, make some noise. I will adjust the volume manually so you'll be able to hear. But please do that, because sometimes I get so excited about what I'm doing that I forget that I need to project. But more importantly, I'm going to spend maybe 45 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, giving you an introduction to the health outcomes of positive experiences. And that will mostly be me talking. Then we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we're going to talk about the fun part, which is how you take this, or how we take this, and put it into our work. So after the break, you're going to come back, and we'll have, within the confines of the seating, groups of 3 or 4 people who will be able to talk with each other as we go through. Because the design of this is so that you leave with your life entirely changed because you were here, not simply because you got a nap, which is also not a, anyway. So what I want to talk to you today about is about health outcomes of positive experiences. And I get to be here, but the work I'm doing is actually the result of the work of a lot of people. Christina Bethel at Johns Hopkins is our ACE statistician. She's completely committed to the idea of figuring out what makes children flourish. And she's done a lot of the data analysis that I'll be showing you. Charlene Harper Brown, who's in Atlanta, is a PhD sociologist, and she's been involved in developing what I'll later call the 4 pillars of hope. Jennifer Jones from the National Alliance for Strong Families and Communities, Bart Klicka from Prevent Child Abuse America, and of course Jeff Lincolnback from the Montana Institute. We all worked together to come up with this concept, and Peter Pecora from Casey Family Programs not only contributed intellectually, but Casey underwrote some of the costs of doing this. So you can see there's a lot of funding that went into the various things I'm showing you. I want to thank all the funders, in particular Casey Family Programs. And then the actual report that's shown here, which you can get from a download, happy to give it to you later, was reviewed by people from around the country who made this. And I can't give a talk like this and not remember my friend and colleague Paula Duncan, who passed away a little over a year ago, who was the person who brought the whole idea of positive experience and social assets into the work of pediatrics. And she's one of the co-authors of Bright Futures, which are the guidelines for boosting healthcare. A very inspiring person. So I want to start, before I go into the work about hope, just to make sure that we're all on the same page about adverse childhood experiences. So the ACES study was published in 1998. It involved 17,000 people, mostly white, all employed, because it was from an HMO, all from the Pacific Northwest. And what they looked at was they asked them questions about adverse childhood experiences and compared their memories of childhood to their current health on that HMO's health records. From this, they determined that having bad things happen to you as a child has long-term health consequences. Dr. Schoenkoff formulated the thing that happens to you when you live under chronic stress that's not buffered or there's no mitigation. What happens to you is you develop toxic stress, which means all of those exciting hormones that make us able to fight off saber-toothed tigers or whatever we used to do through evolution, those are constantly turned on. It changes the way we grow and develop. He called that toxic stress, and it's that toxic stress that leads to adult health problems in that model. So just as a reminder, these were the 10 ACES items for the child: emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, physical neglect, loss of a parent, domestic violence, alcohol, drug abuse, household mental illness, suicide attempt, or household member imprisoned. Now, prior to 1998, I don't think there were a lot of people who said, wow, those are good things to happen to a child. But what this study showed was that having these, the more of those you had, the higher your, quote, ACES score was, and it led to a bunch of health problems. But because it was 1998, and because of the population who were there, they missed a bunch of things. So we now know that the effects of poverty and deprivation, institutional racism, war, migration, neighborhood effects also can cause problems for children and lead to adult health problems. It's the same sort of thing. All of these things can increase a person's stress levels, so they're having this chronic unmitigated stress that leads to toxic stress. And this picture, we'll get back to her. This is a little girl, and she's at her home in Syria, and you can see from looking behind her that her home was recently bombed. So that is an example of an adverse childhood experience that did not occur in the Pacific Northwest in the late 1990s, but perhaps if it had, it might have been included. And I say that because in the United States, we're very fortunate people from around the world come here for asylum, for refuge, and many of those people have had these kinds of adversity, and it's important to pay attention to those as well. In any event, so what happens is that if a person has experienced these things, they can have detrimental health effects: alcoholism, alcohol abuse, chronic pulmonary disease, depression, physical death, health and quality of life, illicit drug use, ischemic heart disease, liver disease, partner violence, sexually transmitted disease, smoking, suicide attempt, unintended pregnancy, adolescent pregnancy, and more. So what's fascinating about this is that that connection was made in a quantitative enough way. The CDC now estimates that 1 year's worth of child abuse results in a hit to our economy of about $500 billion. So because it's not good. So that's really changed things on the policy level. It's a lot of money. All right, now I want to change gears. So is everyone up to, is this the first time for anyone that heard about ACES? Okay, good. Either it isn't or you're too bashful. I'll go all with either one. But now I want to take us down a different path. And when I'm doing this, what I'd like you to do is hold in your mind somebody you know who had childhood adversity but came out okay. It could be yourself, it could be a friend, it could be someone you know through your work, it could be someone you know through your church, it could be someone you've read about. But we all know people who've had bad childhoods who are wonderful. And that's the inspiration for the work we're doing with Hope. In discussing this, I'm going to use Jeff Linkenbach's model called the Science of the Positive. And in the Science of the Positive model, we start with the spirit of what we do. We think about what science says so we can be effective. We take action, and then we reflect on it. So it's pretty easy to fit to Hope, because I think everyone in this room is involved in trying to make life better for children and their families. And that's why you've chosen to do this, the work that you do, whether it's at the YMCA, at the health center, or anywhere else. So the spirit is there, and that's the beginning. What I'm going to talk to you today about before the break is the science. So what is the science that says that positive experiences are important, and what positive experiences? And then after the break, we'll talk about, well, how will that affect the work we do when we leave here at the end of the day? So I want you to just take a moment to think about your own positive childhood experiences. Were there adults who cared about you? Perhaps people in addition to your parents who took an interest in you. A high school teacher, a neighbor, someone from your own faith or your own ethnic community. Something that happened. Did you have family traditions? Do you remember things thinking back to your family, whether it was simple things like dinner together or more complicated things like going to visit grandma. And from your own culture or religion, are there things that provided you some kind of grounding in life that as an adult you try to recreate yourself? And hold that thought. And I'm doing this in part because when we talk about adverse childhood experiences, either we think, oh my God, I'm damaged, or there for the grace of God goes me. When we think about positive experiences, we are the same as the clients we're working with. All of us have some element of the positive in our past that we can touch down and reach to help us with challenges as they go on. So I want you to take this at a personal level as well as the science. I want to start out the science with that because I want this to resonate with our own lives and what we're thinking about. Okay, so now let's go into the science. I'm going to talk about three things: human brain development, the lifelong benefits of positive childhood experiences, and how positive childhood experiences mitigate the effects of ACEs. So remember, adverse childhood experiences can be stressful. That chronic, unmitigated stress leads to toxic stress, which leads to problems, the adult health problems. So by itself, the adverse experiences aren't a disease, they're something that's a risk. So how do positive experiences enable us to heal? So the thing we'll talk about is how our brains develop. And our brains primarily develop in response to experience. So somebody here, I think Karen has a relative who's in labor now, right? Okay. I remember when my children were first born, the first thing they did, they cried, and then they had this like really funky respiration. They go. In the first few minutes of life, they learned how to breathe. Because somewhere deep in their brain said, oh my God, I'm not in mom anymore, I gotta breathe. And if I do this breathing thing, my oxygen goes up, my carbon dioxide goes down, let's figure this out. And in the first 10 minutes of life, we learn to breathe. And then if you go to yoga, you continue to learn to breathe. But leaving that aside, everything we do is the result of experience. So the first experience that we all have is being born. And I mention that because there's some things that are innate, I suppose, but many things happen as a response to the environment we're in. There are rapid periods of brain growth. Early childhood, 0 to 3 years, and adolescence. Anyone here have an adolescent at home? Okay, anyone here ever was a teenager? If you think about it, it's like really remarkable, because by and large, 12-year-olds are children, right? And don't tell them that. You know what the first developmental milestone of adolescence is? It's the eye rolling.
Oh,
so if your children around 8 or 10 start to roll their eyes back when you speak, you know they're on a good developmental trajectory. If they haven't done it by the time they're 14 or 15, get them help.
Good to know.
But a very rapid period of brain development then. And of course, when we're born, we're pretty helpless. And by the time we're 3, we're walking, talking creatures. So a lot happens during this period. We know from the ACES study that adverse experiences, particularly early in life, but also during adolescence, can derail that healthy development. And what I'm going to talk to you today about is that positive experiences promote healthy development. So let's talk about how we know about the brains. The first thing we knew about brains was that they are this structure located inside the skull. And one of the first things that was figured out was that different parts of the brain did different things. So part of your cortex is responsible for movement, part is responsible for vision. This really funky looking thing in the back here is responsible, it's called cerebellum, it's responsible for balance. So we learned all of those things because people had a stroke or they had an arrow put through their head and then they died. And someone looked at their brain and figured out, oh, that person couldn't move their right arm and the left part of their brain up there looks like mushy. Okay? So, but that gives an idea that the brain is this static structure, right? And the amazing development that's happened over really the 21st century is understanding that it's not so static. That at a microscopic view, the brain is filled with cells, And this is the old view of what cells were like using a standard kind of 20th century staining technique. You can see the cell body and you can see some of these fibers. Now we've done much better, and the cell body is over here, but look at that map, that network of connections. Each of our brain cells can make up to 10,000 connections. And the connections moderate what the brain cell does and the signals it sends out along its thousands of connections, which then moderate the effects of the other cells. This gives us an enormous ability to interconnect, to make connections, and to recover if brain cells are gone. If you imagine everybody has 10,000 connections and all of a sudden somebody's gone, the other cells still have 9,999 connections, and they say, sorry, miss you, let's move on. And so we now know from everything from childhood through strokes that our brains, using these connections, can rewire and make new connections. So the approach to medicine and neural development is completely changed, because now we understand it's not just these couple little wires that you might see in an old-fashioned stain, but actually a whole map of connections. And now using MRI techniques, we can actually subtract away the cells and just see the connections. You can see in a real living human being these connections at work. So one of my favorite studies that I looked at in preparation for this kind of work was looking at what happens when you teach an adult to read. And so they took MRI scans of adults, and then they taught them to read, and then when they were literate, they took another set of scans. And what happened was the connections between the part of our brain that's responsible for vision and the part of our brain that's responsible for speech were vastly increased when someone learned to read. Because what happens when you read? You look with your eyes, and somewhere that little voice in your head makes those little word sounds. And that has to happen through connection. The more you use those connections, the more they change. And this is in adults who are not in a rapid period of brain growth. But nevertheless, our brains are always capable of change. So I'm going through all this just to give you a sense of how complex we are. Altogether in this room now, there are about 90 million miles of neural connections. Each of us has about 3 to 10 billion brain cells. Apparently they have a hard time doing a brain cell census, but there are a lot of brain cells. And altogether, they have an estimated 10 quadrillion connections. So we think that the highways are complicated. They're nothing to what each of us has between our ears. So why talk about connections so much? Because experience and learning call on multiple cells and on multiple parts of the brain. And what we know from neural development is that neurons that fire together wire together. So that if all of a sudden, every time you look at a printed word, you have to get a signal back to the speech part of your brain, brain cells called glial cells will grow to insulate those connections, make them faster, and the wiring will become, like, instead of being a little country road, it'll become a superhighway. So you can do it quickly, easily, with this directed kind of thing. And those glial cells, which used to be thought of as kind of garbage, actually turn out to be incredibly important. And we can watch these connections as they happen. We can watch neural activity as it happens with MRI, with advanced three-dimensional EEGs that I have no idea how they work, but they do. And there are people who know them and are able to watch what we think. A little scary. So that's what's happening at the sort of the neural, cellular, electrical level. But there's something else that we've become aware of in the past few years. When I told you about Dr. Schoenkoff's work on toxic stress, one of the things that he supposed, and there's experimental evidence for this, is that when we're under stress, our stress hormones, the adrenal cortical axis, gets all wired up. So if you've ever been frightened or afraid and you feel like you're all sweaty and your heart's beating really fast, and you can run fast, sometimes you might freeze. All of those things are mediated by a set of hormones in our bodies that are designed to warm up. Okay? There's another set of hormones that have come into more understanding in the past few years. When a woman breastfeeds, one of the hormones that's released is called oxytocin. So for a long time, people thought oxytocin was important for breastfeeding. So if you're a person who's breastfeeding, you should really have that going. It's a good thing, right? However, it's now become obvious that that hormone and that whole axis is what gives us those warm, affectionate feelings. Anybody here, you don't have to raise your hand. Anybody here ever fallen in love? Remember, you kind of get a little sweaty, your eyes dilate, your heart might beat fast. Okay? All of those things are mediated by hormones, just the way fear is. Thank you. And that axis is now coming under more study. So not only are we wired to avoid fear, we're wired to make social connection. And that those things are also deeply seated. So finally, science has now caught up with poetry. How cool is that? So I love talking about these things because it sounds like so advanced and scientific, and you think, oh, people have known about this before. But I think this is the next thing we're going to hear about a lot, is measuring oxytocin levels, looking at the effect of affection, bonding, relationship on how well we grow up. Oops. So connection happens within the brain. And that's because neurons that fire together wire together. And experience leads to changes in our very brain structure. And our brains adapt not just during these rapid periods, but throughout life, but obviously more during the rapid periods. And through oxytocin, and frankly through cortisol and bad stuff, stress and love each set off changes in our neural and hormonal networks. So those things that flow through our systems affect how our brains develop, how we develop, and children respond to both parents and the community in making all of these connections. So that's how the brain grows. So if you think about it, how do parents of newborns develop their own networks? And if you imagine a well-functioning family from birth to age 8, think about all the supports that they need to make that work. You really literally can't raise a child on your own. And we think about, and this is what the Greater Brockton Health Alliance thinks about a lot, is how do we create an environment that supports those? And then we all live in different communities. How do our cultural expectations influence network formation? People who believe I can do it all by myself are going to end up with a different sort of network than people who are, for example, deeply religious and do all those things. And I think that we'll get to this later, but how can we help parents make those connections, and what can communities or the programs we work with do to help? And that's what we'll discuss after the break. So now I've given you a basic introduction to the human brain. So if you ever want to go to medical school and study neuroanatomy, you're all set, right? But I think that the take-home lesson there is that the brain, unlike the liver, maybe liver, I don't know anything with liver. The brain keeps changing throughout life in response to our experiences. But let's look at the lifelong effects of positive experiences, and I'll see if I can convince you that they're every bit as important as the lifelong effects of adverse experiences. So this is what's in the report that I'll make sure you have, you can download it. And the first part is data from National Survey of Children's Health with Dr. Christina Bethel from Hopkins is the lead on that. It's a population survey done together with the US Census Bureau. It includes measures of children's mental and physical health and key elements of their home environment. So the analysis that she did looked at home environments, the use of nonviolent discipline, talk about that later, the ability of a child to adapt to adversity, and there were some measures that she put into the National Survey of Children's Health, and then the outcomes were emotional, mental, and behavioral health problems, health habits, obesity, and in the most recent survey, something called flourishing. And here's like the main result that was in our report. Parents actually matter. There's a strong association between childhood experience, maternal health, and child well-being. One of the things that I think in pediatrics we neglect to think about as much as we should is the health of the parents. Home environments that support child well-being, and look at these are all relational. Sharing meals together, spending time together, and the parent participating in children's activities. All of those things were associated with children who became more resilient, whether they were normally developing or they had special health needs. And then in this slide, well, I just want to just draw your attention to the red ones are children who are not resilient. They're never, only sometimes calm when faced with challenges. And the blue are children who are resilient. This group here are those who had no ACEs, who had one ACE, and who had 2 or more ACEs. And the outcome are social, emotional, behavioral problems. So just a quick look, you can see resilient children, even if they're exposed to ACEs, are much better protected against childhood mental health problems than if they weren't. So just to drive that point home, children who have 2 or more ACEs but are resilient have a lower risk, a lower proportion of kids with these emotional, mental, behavioral problems than kids with no ACEs who are not resilient. And in the analysis, it's those parent attributes that I talked about that promote resilience. So parenting matters. We also wanted to find out what US adults think about this, because sometimes we think we have all the answers. And it turns out that if you do a population survey, which YouGov.com did, they asked about 2,500 Americans about their beliefs about parenting. If they had children under 5, we asked them about their actual parenting. And we also asked them what other parents in the state did. And most parents already know and believe in positive parenting. So catch your child being good, responding to crying, playing or reading to children, give the child words, seldom or never spanking the child, seldom never fighting in front of the child. All of those things, regardless of whether you're white, black, or Latino, US parents believe that. And what's really fascinating is if you look at old people, and by old, I mean over 40. Can you imagine? Nervous laugh there. There's a generational shift. That older people are more likely to believe in corporal punishment than younger people, and younger people are accurately more likely to think that their elders think they should be spanking their kids. But among the people who are actually raised in this generation of Americans, whether they're black, white, or Latino, very little difference in their attitude toward these positive parenting things, and very little difference in what they say they're actually doing. In Massachusetts, in the Essentials for Childhood group, we're really struck by the fact that nobody seems to need help, and we're trying to I think we've all decided that the word help is a bad word, and that when people answered the survey, when they read the word help, they meant, oh, I should turn myself into the Department of Children and Families. But actually, all the work that we do is really involved with helping parents raise their kids, whether it's our work or whether it's things we do in our own neighborhoods or our communities. So we're trying to unpack that and change that a little bit. Okay, so I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about a study that we did in, sorry, I'm having trouble with this. There you go. Okay, there you go. About a study that we did in Wisconsin. And this was another population study as part of the Behavioral Risk Surveillance System, which all 50 states do. It's a CDC-sponsored program, and we looked at adverse positive experiences, and we added positive childhood experiences to the 2015 administration in Wisconsin, and then we looked at outcomes of health status and health risk behaviors. So health status is, do you have heart disease? The health risk behaviors, do you smoke? Just to make that really clear. And what we found was that positive childhood experiences moderate the effects of ACEs. And this is really important, because one of the problems with ACEs is if you tell someone you have a score of 4, your chance of suicide are 17 times, I'm making the numbers up, 17 times higher than Karen, who has an ACEs score of 1. Have a nice day. That doesn't leave you very much. You know, these people feel labeled and stigmatized and hopeless. But we now know that we are way more complicated than the sum of the bad things that happen to us. So let's look at what happens when we look at that. First, looking at some of the items, there are 8 items related to child poverty and neglect, 6 to promoting resilience. There are about 5,000 individuals who answered this. Wisconsin is less diverse than the country as a whole, so we're hoping to repeat this in other states. These are the questions. How often did you feel that your family stood by you in difficult times? How often did you feel that you were able to talk to your family about your feelings? How often was an adult in your household who made you feel safe and protected? How often did you enjoy participating in your community traditions? How often did you feel supported by your friends? How often did you feel that you belonged at high school? Notice, this is not what grades did you get in high school. This is how you felt. And were there at least 2 adults, other than your parents, who took a genuine interest in you? And if we look at these one by one, these are among Wisconsinites who had 4 or more ACEs. If they answered, the family stood by them always or almost always. They had 27% of them had a diagnosis of depression, compared to 48% of people in Wisconsin with 4 or more ACEs who answered seldom or never. Same thing, felt supported by their friends, looked 49% to 31%. Sense of belonging in high school, 29% versus 46%. Enjoyed community traditions, 27% versus 42%. In the world of public health, these are huge effects, really huge effects. So the other thing that Dr. Bethel has done more recently is made an index where you add up how many of these 7 possible positive childhood experiences a person answered. And so then you can look at your PCE score and your ACEs score. And this is where it gets really even more fun. So as you can see, the blue ones are people who had 6 to 7 of the 7 possible positive childhood experiences. Orange, 3 to 5, half of the positive childhood experiences. And the gray, virtually none. So that the questions were the ones I showed you earlier. And the people who had no ACEs, it kind of didn't matter. So the results of how many people were depressed or had poor mental health was about the same. It was about 10%. Once you start having a few ACEs, or in this case, 1 ACE, look at the difference. People who had 6 to 7 positive childhood experiences really had only the baseline level of depression or poor mental health. People who had no positive experiences jumped up very high. And without belaboring, you can see that across all the levels of ACEs, these gradually go up, but the effect of those particular positive childhood experiences is dramatic at reducing adult depression or poor mental health. And in this case, poor mental health means having poor mental health or feeling badly for 12 out of the past 30 days. Yes?
Just a question, so if a child is on medications at all, does that make a difference?
Yeah, so this study was a survey, and it was among adults in Wisconsin, and it was looking back on your childhood. So that kind of question, we need to study that, but we don't know. I think it's probably fine. The idea of medications is you can live a normal life. But did you have something, so this question can't get there. Did you have any particular concerns?
If you're taking antidepressants or something that affects the brain functioning, the brain developing, how does that play in?
Yeah, so the question on depression was, I remember the words were almost, have you ever been diagnosed by a healthcare professional with depression? So it wasn't, are you depressed today? It wasn't those standard measures of depression that many of us administer. It was, in your lifetime as an adult answering the survey, have you ever had a diagnosis of depression? And in the poor mental health was, did you have 12 days in the past month when you had poor mental health? So if you had a history of depression, you were on medication and you were fine, you would still be entered in this group as a positive. It's not how you are today, it's did you ever have this illness? Okay. Other questions? No? There's one person back here who I think is a biostatistician or knows something about numbers. How did I do? Okay. Good. She's not saying. Okay. Good. Thumbs up. All right. Sort of relieved. Fortunately, yes.
I'm curious too about your research. I'm wondering if you account for any type of like genetic predispositions to things like depression or certain mental health disorders.
The question is, did we look at genetic predispositions? The answer is no, we didn't. I think that my view is that experience is much more important than genetics because our genetics haven't changed substantially and forever because they change very slowly. But the kind of issues that we're dealing with have certainly changed. So if you think about what's going on in the world, we are more alone than we ever were in history because in a traditional culture, we would live in villages, most people would be related to us in one way or another, and there's a whole support network that just happened. And now we're living in nuclear families or subatomic families, so some of these issues, these relational issues are more modern than genetics. But that's my view. There are other people who believe genes are everything. They're wrong, but they hold everything. And I'm sorry. Did that help? We didn't look, we had no way of looking at it, we didn't. There is another study that we'll be doing, I hope, with NIH, where they have a cohort of children who had their DNA completely sequenced, and as far as I can tell, every aspect of their lives completely measured and recorded. And we'll be trying to answer some of those questions more seriously than Dr. Bob's feelings, which we'll see. But that come back in 10 years. Because I think now with modern DNA sequencing, we can get at those questions. Because one of the things is that some things are really easy to tell genetically, like hair color, eye color, sickle cell disease, because they have 1 or 2 genes that cause them. Things like depression and mental health have many, many genes involved in them. So it's very difficult to disentangle that. So I just want to bring this back, and then we'll take a break in just a minute, and remember this little girl that I mentioned before, just so you get an idea of what I'm talking about. So remember this little girl, I showed you her picture before. She was a toddler in Syria when her home was bombed. She had an adverse experience. And the next slides are also from the media, and I want you to imagine it's the same girl. Of course they weren't, because that's not how it works. But imagine they're the same girl. So she had that experience, and then she was whisked off to a refugee camp where she was with her extended family. And you can see her down here with her brother, her sister, and her brothers. And one of her memories when she tells her children and grandchildren is, yeah, we got whisked off this refugee camp, and me and my brothers, we used to play tag between all the tents, and the parents were all stressed out, but we had a great time. And you know your uncle Charlie, he did this crazy thing, right? So family can be a really strong buffer to very severe adversity. And so there are some people who think that we shouldn't be separating immigrant children from their families, but I won't become political. Just to say families can be a buffer for the adversity of war and migration. And then kind of an amazing thing happened, and it's hard to remember this because it was a couple of years ago and attitudes have changed a little bit, but when these same refugees came to Munich, people lined the streets and applauded them and did things like this woman giving this young man a teddy bear. So the next memory became a community memory. When we finally got to a safe place, people lined the streets to welcome us. So now, adversity, war, bad. Family was a protective buffer, and in this particular case, the community acceptance and things that happened from that were another level of buffering. So this young person will have a complicated history. You don't wish war on anybody, but she's going to be better off than someone who didn't have the protection of the family and didn't have a welcoming community. There was a question.
Yeah, just a question, by looking at the child, it looks like malnutrition was quite evident in the camp.
Yep. Maybe, although his hair is black. So one of the things that I look for as a doctor is if you have protein malnutrition, your hair isn't black. So if you look at pictures of kids from from India or China, where their hair is usually very dark, and they have this like lovely reddish hair. It makes doctors cry. So it's a little bit hard to tell who's skinny and who's malnourished with all of the clothes on and stuff. I agree with you, it's a little scary, but it's not as bad as it could be. Other questions? Yeah, and it also goes to the point, we're not recommending war and migration as a way to achieve health. But just to point out that there are buffers. So what I'm going to do is take a 5-minute break, because we're going to come back and you're going to start doing all the work. But as you go off and take your break, think about whether knowledge of positive childhood experiences and the health effects of positive experiences. How that works and how the health effects of positive experiences affect how we interpret an ACES score. So you take 5 minutes, and when you come back, we're going to go from the science to action. If you have more questions about the background that I gave you, we'll start off with time for questions. So just take 5 minutes and stretch, and we'll come right back. Successfully change the lives of children and adolescents. We found that there are 4 characteristics of things that experiences that programs promote that make a difference. And this is the answer to the question of what kinds of experiences have positive health outcomes. So being in nurturing, supportive relationships. Of course, the first nurturing, supporting relationship we all have is with our parents. And many of you know about infant attachment, very important. And then it goes on later, our friendships, our own romantic relationships. So being in those relationships. The second has to do with environments. Do children feel like they're living, playing, and learning in safe, stable, protective, and equitable environments? So if you feel that you're being unfairly sent to a really crappy playground filled with broken glass, not only is it unsafe, but it's inequitable and may lead to a feeling of anger, who knows? That doesn't help development. Because we know, and we'll talk about it, that play is a really important part of how we all develop. Engaging in constructive social and civic activities that develop a sense of connectedness. So if you think about this, from a very early age, children who are relied on to help out, whether it's setting the table for this family dinner, or teenagers who are going shopping for elderly people who can't do their own shopping, having that feeling that what you do matters in the world is extremely important. And Charlene refers to this as the sense of mattering, that we all want to feel that our lives matter. And that happens because we're allowed to engage in these activities that develop this sense. And finally, opportunities to develop social and emotional competencies. And Robert Putnam, who's a Harvard professor who wrote Bowling Alone, had a recent book about childhood. And one of the things he talked about is one of the places that we all, especially in those days boys, learn social and emotional competence is through sports, right? If you imagine you're a wonderful baseball player and you are one of the best batters in the American League, 2 out of 3 times you get to bat, you don't get a hit. And if you end up crying and throwing a tantrum and throwing the bat somewhere, you don't end up being Big Poppy. It just doesn't happen. So it's those little challenges, those little losses that we all feel through these social interactions. That's how you develop social and emotional competence. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more. But I think that what he called out was that in many American school districts, probably including the ones around here, there are now fees for after-school sports. So children whose parents can't afford the fees are deprived this opportunity. And it's not the opportunity to become an NFL player, it's the opportunity to develop social and emotional competence that Dr. Putnam really calls out as being a huge problem. As well as the idea, part of emotional competence is dealing with people who come from backgrounds different than yours. So even the kids who are doing the after-school activities aren't developing the competence to deal with people who come from different backgrounds. So small budgetary thing may have long-lasting implications. Well, let's talk about being and nurturing supportive relationships first. So parents create conditions that favor these positive experiences, and they create those lifelong memories of supportive relationships. And remember, in both the ACES study and the Wisconsin study that I told you about, it's what adults remember about their childhood. It's not some expert sitting in a dark room reviewing a videotape of a person's entire childhood. It's what we remember. So in our programs, we need to think about those relationships. Who's actually parenting the child? Do we include fathers, grandparents, and other adults? When we talk with parents, one of the things that's in the New Bright Futures is who helps you raise your child. And Carl Bell, who's a psychiatrist in Chicago, says that you need to be able to list at least 2 or 3 people who help you to be healthy. And we can help parents help children build relationships with other children, and help parents develop relationships with other parents. And in their work looking at high quality early childhood education, Judy Langford and the Center for the Study of Social Policy compared really good high quality early childhood environments to ones that were maybe not so good. And I never forget that one of the things she said was, when they walk in, they open the closet and there are adult-sized chairs, like folding chairs. She knows that's a high-quality environment. And the reason is because the parents are so engaged, they staged a revolt and said, I'm not sitting in those toddler chairs for 1 more minute. So the parents are engaged. So sometimes we can do that and think about how we all engage with our communities. That's certainly one way. I also want to point you to some web-based resources, the AP's healthychildren.org and the Center for Disease Control's Parenting Essentials. Both have ideas about some of these things. The other thing that goes on to help with this is the parents' wellness. The parents need physical, mental health because we know that promotes child development. So parents who resent their children because they're falling apart physically or mentally, shockingly, are not the best parents. And parents need to take care of themselves, both so they have the emotional resilience to take care of their kids, and also as a model for their kids. Because, you know, kids watch us. And they're very attuned to what we do. So one of the things we can do as professionals is give parents time and permission for self-care. You know, it's really important to how you raise your family that you take time for yourself. I know after Susie was born, you stopped doing your yoga. It's time to start up again. I picked on her in the front row. Teach us in the front row. Sorry. But all those things, if you know someone, you can talk with them. Are they involved with their religious organizations? Are they involved in their hobbies? Do they have time as a couple? All those things are super important. And to try to help them reframe it that they're not abandoning their child. They're taking care of their child by taking care of themselves. Especially for those of us who work so many hours, it can be really hard to overcome the guilt of taking care of ourselves. And we want to promote activities like health, exercise, mindfulness, sleep, and promote relationships with others who provide support. So these little cheesy pictures of people talking is my clue to ask you guys to find groups of 3 or 4 people sitting near you, maybe behind you, maybe in front of you, and just talk about an example. And if each of you provide to the people you're talking with one example from your work with how you help families in your community achieve nurturing, supportive relationships. So I'm going to give you 4 or 5 minutes and find some friendly neighbors. And when we talk about this, and then we'll do a couple of responses and we'll go on. Okay? And the reason we're doing this is because what we know is that you guys weren't born yesterday, and you have a lot of experience, and you have more experience in a lot of things than I do. So if you want to get the actual answers, you have to talk to each other. So go for it. And that discussion was so vibrant. Remember how I said this can be done, report out? Well, we'll do something a little bit different. What I want to do is just ask, we're going to do 2 parts of this discussion. Just ask for volunteers to mention an idea that came from their small group, and everybody listen to that, and then we'll have a larger group discussion on what we think in this group, the various places we work can do to support the development of these relationships. So who wants to be the first? There you go. Thank you. Go for it.
I think we were kind of excited, actually. I mentioned something. I had gone to a concert, I actually helped with the Me Too Orchestra,
Uh-huh.
which is trying to erase the stigma of mental health and what it is inclusive for individuals who anyway, you can Google them. And
Uh-huh.
Me Too Orchestra, they were before the Me Too Women's Movement. But if you Google them, you'll see basically the concept of allowing people to participate in musical events, 50% of them who have been diagnosed with mental disorders. The other 50% are just supportive of it. Their concerts are great, they're classical, they're just
Wow.
over the top wonderful. But, so we brought in the connection between the arts and families participating, not necessarily in sports, but in the arts in
Yep.
general, whatever aspect of the arts one might think of.
I love that because the arts clearly touch a different part of our brains and our spirits. And I'm glad that was the first one that was brought up. Other things come out of the groups. Karen.
One of the things we talked about is, some of the people work with the elderly, that they can see that not only has, that positive experiences go through childhood, but it affects them all the way through their aging process. But those opposite, if they don't have them, it affects how they raise their kids and are raising those kids. So generationally, so to think about it not just in terms of the now, but for going on through the decades and how it helps them, how positive social interactions can help them as they age, but also help them be resilient all the way through their life cycle.
It's a really important point. It doesn't stop when we finish being children. And that's sort of one of the fascinating discoveries about the modern brain science is that we used to think our brains just fell apart, and now they're actually developing. And so all kinds of things that happen. Other things that come up from the work you do that helps nurture supportive relationships. Please don't let Karen have the last word.
The district that we work in, we do quite a few things for families, but one such thing is happening right now. We have a humanities camp occurring for elementary school students with breakfast and lunch free. Our 5th graders this year are being totally sponsored by community grants to attend the Boston Symphony Orchestra, every 5th grader in Stoughton.
Wow.
So we have a parent engagement center. So we have parent liaisons in the school, so we do all kinds of activities at night, yoga classes for parents. And so we're kind of doing a lot, more than we've ever done before.
Great. That's wonderful. Did anybody else hear that? Yeah, good. Anyone in the back have interesting discussions?
We're not going to share.
Someone there moved. I don't know if you were scratching your ear or you had something to say.
I was scratching.
So I think that what I'm hearing is that there are programs, there are things that you're doing that actively reach out to create a community, either of people with different abilities or among the parents as well as the 5th graders themselves to do arts and culture. And Karen pointed out this goes on throughout life. So are there things that you think of, just by show of hands, that you might think about doing differently or doing more of in your own work to support these community relationships and individual relationships? Anybody? Raise your hand. Okay. So you have a little piece of paper next to you. You should write down 1 or 2 ideas that you have so that when you leave this room and your mind goes back to everyday life, you'll hold on to those ideas. I'm going to make you do this 4 times, 1 for each pillar, just warning you. So something you might want to think about or explore. No one's going to grade you on it. I just know that when I walk out of a meeting, I have all these good intentions, and sometimes they vanish by Wednesday morning. So I'm going to try to help with that. I'm going to go on to the next one. Living, playing, and learning in safe, stable, protective, and equitable environments. So here, now we're talking about, we're moving from that individual interpersonal relationship to the environments that we set up. And we know a bunch of things. One is that safe outdoor space for play is important. One of my heroes, Dr. Barbara Barlow, who was the chair of surgery at Harlem Hospital, ended up as an injury prevention strategy rehabilitating playgrounds, in Upper Harlem, which she did in collaboration with community members. They had these things. You ever heard of these where you go and you buy this playground equipment and then everybody in the community puts it all together under supervision? So they did that in the communities. They had art students who worked with community members, including kids, to make murals in the playgrounds. So if you have a safe place to play, you will end up playing there. And if instead, as was the case before she started, your playground was strewn with old needles from people who have been using injectable medications, I'm sure it was all diabetics. Then kids don't want to play there, parents of course don't want them to play there, so that's how you take it back. So creating safe outdoor places for play, equitable support for quality early care and education, positive school environments. And, we used to talk a lot about bullying at school, and that one underwent a really interesting transition, because it used to be adults were great, kids had this bullying problem. And then as they started doing these anti-bullying programs, they realized that some of the bullies were paid for by received salaries from the school system. And so over the years, those original strategies have evolved into something called creating a positive school environment that starts with the principals. Anyone here a principal? Okay. Three of them. Okay, now I'm intimidated. But creating a positive school environment between the administration, the staff, the kids, and in that environment, anti-bullying programs succeed. And in an environment where if you bully that kid, I'm going to beat you up, somehow don't work so well. It's very interesting how this has evolved. But those positive school environments are incredibly important for the students and for the people who work there. And you guys know more about this than I do and what's involved in making it happen. And access to nature. And in California, people talk about nature deficiency syndrome, where kids don't get outside enough. Because one of the things I think about when I think about getting your little baby outside, inside, it's pretty quiet, there's no wind, there's not a lot of variation. You go outside and all of a sudden, even if you're in a stroller in a city, there are things moving, there are smells, there are noises. So what's going on in your brain is you're learning, you're categorizing all that stuff that's going on around you. That has to be good for you. And nature is by its nature both awe-inspiring and unpredictable. So your brain works over time. And that's the people who think of nature deficiency syndrome. Not so easy to accomplish, but it is possible to get kids outside to experience some of that. There are also policies, and we know that policies that support health outcomes of positive experiences also prevent abuse and neglect. So one thing in the work that we're doing around the country is doing our best to make sure that the basic needs for all children are met. And in medicine, we refer to this as social determinants of health, which has been the idea that if a family doesn't have enough food or shelter or other basic circumstances, that it's not good for you. And it's not good for kids. And one thing we know about the safety net in the United States is it is, in my opinion, imperfect. But having said that, there are a large number of parents who don't get all the things that they can, that they're entitled to, or that are available to them. So we started asking people simple things about hunger. And in my own experience, when I worked at a hospital, when this first became an issue, I didn't really want to talk about it, because I'm a pediatrician, and if you told me that you were hungry, I would say, oh, Rob, I'm so sad for you. Bye. But I've learned over the years that now we know that some people have, that there are other resources, whether they're food banks or WIC or SNAP, that are available for food. And certainly in the schools, and one thing that's happened is we've now, in some districts, they've expanded school lunches to include ways to feed kids in the summer, because that's a problem. So we can't solve all the problems, and we certainly can't solve all the political problems, but for individual families to make sure that they're getting access to the best they possibly can is something we can do. And I'm really happy to say that last year the legislature passed paid parental leave in Massachusetts. And there are currently somewhere in the state, they're having hearings about the regulations. And I believe that it's going to start in January of 2021, which is fast by state time. But I think there'll be a lot for us to work on when that happens, to make sure that people can take advantage of that. And we can talk about that, but that's become a national trend. It started in California, and then New York State, and now other states are doing it as well. And what's happened is that paid parental leave has several benefits, one of which is a reduction in child abuse and neglect. And if you think about health outcomes of positive experiences, if you're able to be home and feed your family with your baby, when she cries, you might be a little more resilient because you may be getting other stuff from it. I think this is really important. We are, I believe, the last industrialized nation to figure this out. And all around the world, people have figured this out. But you actually do need time. And for families that live paycheck to paycheck, which is most of us, the FMLA, which offers unpaid leave, is not very satisfying. Because just protecting your low-wage job is better than not, but it still doesn't pay the bills. So I'm really happy this is happening. I'm sure there are going to be loopholes. There's going to be a lot of public education. You'll hear more about this. And one of my hopes and dreams is that dads will take leave too. Partly based on research and policy and partly based on my own experience. Quality early childhood education, constantly up for discussion. Other states, really advanced progressive states like Oklahoma, provide this. Oklahoma actually has universal pre-K and a much better policy, and it just takes a few dedicated people in the state legislature who won't shut up to make it happen. So I'm hopeful that will happen elsewhere. And in general, policies that promote parental health. And one thing we saw was when Romney Care happened in Massachusetts, and then nationally when the Affordable Care Act was passed, all of a sudden adults, many of whom were parents, or parents, many of whom were adults, depending on your view, were taking care of their chronic diseases. Fewer deaths, fewer horrible situations from things like diabetes and high blood pressure, and all of those things. So that's a policy decision, because people didn't decide to be poor and not to be able to pay for their own health care because there wasn't anything. Now I think that the Affordable Care Act nationally, and certainly we were a pioneer with Governor Romney's version of it here, has really changed adult health. And that's important, and I think that's going to have long-term implications for the children of these adults. There's a national program called Essentials for Childhood. Massachusetts is one of the states that's funded to do this, and that's from the Center for Disease Control. And they've decided that the way to prevent child abuse and neglect is to promote safe, stable, nurturing relationships and environments. And that is a huge sea change in how we view child abuse and neglect, because it used to be that there were a few bad people, criminals, who abused or neglected their children. And that was back in the day when most child abuse and neglect was swept under the rug. And now that we know more about what happens in families, it's really becoming apparent that it's that whatever you can do to support young children and their families to become resilient is important. And the CDC has just some excellent resources, and our state is involved in that program. Jeff Linkenbach was the lead author on something from the CDC promoting positive community norms. And one of the community norms that we really think about is that our children are our future and they're our collective responsibility. So that there is the countervailing thing that my children, they're mine, I raise them how I want, that's all true. I could do it on my own, not true. And so trying to figure out how you deal with that in a way that doesn't assault people's own belief in independence, but just helps provide a way where we are doing it. And there are a bunch of surveys that we know, for example, that if taxpayers feel that their taxes would actually go to supporting early childhood, a majority of taxpayers would deal with a small increase in taxes to support early childhood. So there's a lot of popular opinion behind this, but we're really not very good at articulating that. Because literally, today's kids they're going to be working when I'm in the nursing home, and they better be educated so I can have a nice nursing home.
Yeah, right.
Oh, that wasn't collective. I'm sorry. but we all benefited from the investment of prior generations, and we can do the same thing. And so the CDC has developed this with Jeff Lincolnback's leadership to look at how you do social norms campaigns that help address some of the common misperceptions about how children grow up and what families need. Okay, so now my next cheesy internet stock picture of people talking to each other. And what I want you to do is think again of an example from your work. How does your work culture or your personal culture resonate with creating environments for living, playing, and learning in safe, equitable, whatever environments? So how do you create an environment that's a good place to play, that's a good place to learn, and that comes across as supporting all of those things that we know that children need to thrive to be in that environment? And you can say in your STAIN groups to do this, or if you're sick of them, you can move around a little bit. And once again, give about 5 minutes, and then we'll call on people, including people in the back, to offer some ideas, and we'll think about what's going on in the Greater Brockton area. What else people were thinking? So this time I'm going to start with the people in front who talked to me during the discussion about something they observed in their schools about this, and then we'll go around and see if we have other people who would like to add things about how we create environments, or really what we're pushing against in creating a safe, stable learning and playing, safe, stable, whatever. These kind of learning environments for kids. Do you want to say something, Rob, or anyone?
We were just discussing that the findings and the conclusions from studies like this don't necessarily get carried over to elementary schools, at least, with the fast pacing of the curriculum, the over-assessing of students. I think our students receive like 1 time per week a kind of social thinking type of curriculum to help support them through this kind of stuff. But they're receiving hours and hours and hours of mathematics, reading, so we don't see what's going on curriculum-wise, paralleling the necessities that this research is bringing up.
There needs to be more of a balance.
Yep. And we're talking, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to add, and over the years, less and less playtime, outdoor time, less stress on developmental learning, and more on trying to chase those standards and things like that.
And all of that mixed with Fortnite. It's, it's
Yeah.
a terrible combination.
Yeah. Other ideas that came up about creating this kind of environment? In the back? And then-
Yes. We talked about engaging the parents more, especially like at the middle school age years, because oftentimes we find that there's a disconnect with parents and their child. Sometimes they're more involved in the elementary school age level, and then once they get to the middle school age level, there's a disconnect. So it's important to provide resources and activities for the parents within the community so that they're aware.
It's a hard age for parents. And I think you're really bringing up something really important about creating those environments where they can vent and understand child development and recall with misery their own middle school years. Sorry, please.
I was just going to say also that a lot of these parents are working 1 and 2 jobs, and it's difficult to get that quality time for kids, for schoolwork or whatever they have to achieve. Unfortunately, parents are struggling and working jobs that they have to have 1 or 2 jobs and not being there for them. So that's a problem.
Yeah. And I believe it's the Children's Defense Fund looked at what the implications for children are of increasing the minimum wage. So I think that there is also some policy level things. It's hard to know what to do in an individual program. It's a really important point. Yes?
Yeah, I've been thinking about domains outside of healthcare that affect the positive childhood experiences. So thinking about minimum wage or more in the realm of education or the criminal justice system, and just how important it is for us to think about the impact of our health, like, and well-being as a society when we mobilize in other domains, not just in healthcare. But that's my political statement. The one thing I want to say about what we discussed was just the value of a trusting, safe relationship, both with the patients or community members that we serve, within families, and then within the workplace too, because those ultimately become parallel processes.
It's really important. We spend so much time at work, and those relationships matter. Karen, did you want to say something?
Just how important other outside the family, other communities are, whether that be people's cultural communities, their religious, all of those things. For many people who are immigrant families who are coming in by themselves, that they need to. It's not just family members, but it's all types of communities. And that importance makes up. And how we've lost some of that, and how some of the accountability or different things that people had seen from previous generations, that we have to help, I think, as policymakers, help to recreate some of those opportunities for people to get together.
Great.
I'm just going to stretch that a little bit. So if you have children in your community that are hospitalized for mental health issues and then have to go back to the school district or the community or whatever, I think that's very difficult for the schools and the community to deal with. And then kids then that get reinstitutionalized for years, I feel fall through the cracks of what we're talking about. And how can the community and the school support them better, and then support the families as well?
It's a really important issue, because I know that, because I'm a doctor, I know that some schools are really good about reintegrating kids with chronic or severe illnesses like cancer or something when they go back to school. But I don't know if so much happens with mental health issues, because all of us at some level haven't really gotten past the stigma of mental health compared to physical health. It's a really important point.
My hope, I'll use the loop. That's why I kind of came to this, and why I'm always looking for that glimmer of some program that is one of those aha moments that really can effectively change to adapt to these kids, I guess.
One more comment.
So I work for an organization called Minding Your Mind. It's a mental health and suicide prevention foundation. And just moving from your point, I think that that's so important. How we support parents and schools is by sending young adult speakers who have had their own mental health struggles and are now in a place of wellness to go in and give their stories to increase help-seeking behaviors for kids. And that's how you break down these stigmas. We also do trainings for faculty and for parents. It's like, how do you help someone who's struggling? And I think in doing that, this is like the ultimate, right? It's like, how do you create a culture of understanding people around you, and how do you build these relationships which are naturally difficult? And so I think we're all in the right place.
Yeah. I just want to add that we do it because of the kids who are the patients, but actually the long-term benefits to all the other kids in the school community, because mental health conditions are so common. Throughout life, we're going to be dealing with people who struggle with that. So those lessons you can teach kids are so important. Again, I'm going to give you a minute just to take your pad of paper and write down one or two ideas that you want to take home with you. Activities that develop a sense of connectedness, or as we talked about earlier, that develop a sense of mattering. So let's talk about this for just a minute and what this means. So first of all, when we think about this, and some of the last comments really touched on that, when we think we matter to our communities, it's really interesting to think about who we think our community is. So is it our cultural, religious, or spiritual group? Is it people who came from the same country or speak the same language that I do? People who live in my neighborhood, who attend the same school or preschool? Is it people who look like me? Is it people who work like me? And probably for most of us, we are parts of multiple communities. So the beauty of that is it gives us multiple opportunities for engagement. So if you're not engaged with your neighbors, you might be engaged in your church, or vice versa. And so to think broadly about what opportunities for engagement there are. And examples of engagement, like there's the child's engagement at school, and we talked earlier about that feeling that you belonged at your high school. And teachers are often pretty good at giving kids little mini assignments like collect those papers. I would date myself if I said clean the erasers. But giving kids that sense that what they're doing, thank you, it's exactly what I was thinking. But giving kids a sense that they are not just a consumer, but a producer of the community they live in. And parents can do that with giving kids simple chores that they can do developmentally, so at home they feel as if they matter. And the other part that came out of the survey was the parents' engagement with children's activities. And living in a suburb, I kind of bristled this a little bit because I've seen parents who are too engaged. And how do you find the right balance so that children can feel like they can develop, they can play themselves without having a parent organize it? At the same time, the question that came from over there, if parents are working 2 jobs, how do you carve out enough time so they can have time to genuinely be interested in their kids' artistic or athletic or music, whatever they're interested in. And we know that if parents care about you and care about all those things, not just your grades, it really matters. So I think it's a challenge to find, in all these things, to find the right balance. But nevertheless, whatever my experience raising my kids in the suburbs was, the surveys clearly show that parents' engagement with their kids is important. So this is something we're not going to do today, but it's something you might do with your staff. I think it really helps us all own this, is to think about the general question of what does community mean? For each of us to mention 3 communities that you yourself are part of. And then how do the families that we're involved with professionally, how do they define community? So is it people who speak Portuguese? Is it people who live in this neighborhood? Is it people who have children with a special healthcare need? All of those are communities. People who go to the same church. It's all good. But I think to really start to brainstorm about that, and then what do each of these communities do to bring people together, and how effective is it? And how, because we know it's important, but it's not necessarily straightforward to figure out how to support people's engagement in this, both because of our own natural shyness and the outside circumstances of how hard we work. So some of the things that come from experience and literature, keys to making connection, invite people personally. My neighborhood, when kids were growing up, we had a potluck on Monday evenings at a little local park. It took a while to get started, but the way it got started is there was a person, we'll call her Amy, actually that's her name, would call everybody on Sunday night and say, oh, we're at potluck tomorrow, are you going to be there? I really want to see you. And that personal thing, and then that ended up paying out all kinds of dividends, because we all got to know each other as parents, and one of the parents brought this kind of rotted grape juice in little bags to the playground while the kids played. So wine, sorry. Yeah. But we got to know our kids, friends, parents, and it was really because it was hard to say no to an individual person saying, I would love to see you at this event.
Especially the rotted grape juice.
The rotted grape juice was really good too. But even without that, but I think that one thing, we can't necessarily bring wine to all events, but the idea of not just posting a note or sending a blast email, but saying, I really think you'd like it, it'd be wonderful to see you, we can catch up. It really matters. Family fun days, and we talked in the last session about how adults are nose to the grindstone with 1 or 2 jobs, kids are nose to the grindstone, they gotta get good grades on the MCAS, but we are allowed to have fun, and some fun things aren't expensive, you just have to organize them, make it happen. There may be activities going on in the community, you can help your clients, students, parents, patients, whoever, know about those things that are going on with community groups, with their faith-based organizations, whatever. And then one thing that someone suggested at one of these talks, which completely rocked my boat, was you can ask parents. Who knows? Parents know about these things. And particularly if you have parents who you think are really engaged, ask them what's going on and what they do to get that sense of civic engagement. And so we want to make sure that when we make positive experiences, that the places that we all work, which are places where parents and children congregate, because that's the work we all do, that those are also a place where they can become a hub for resources, and you can engage parents and kids in developing and maintaining these ideas. This doesn't necessarily have to be something that the professional staff does all the time. People can own some of these things, and they're actually better if they do. So that's why this is part of the engagement set. Is this may not be a service, but it's really, really useful. So I think that oftentimes, myself as a doctor, and maybe many of you too, when we think about how to make life better, we think about the services that we can provide to them. And engagement is the opposite. It's what we do for ourselves as a community, and how do we engage with other people in similar circumstances. For example, other parents of middle school age children. So we're gonna do this again. Do you guys like these little breakouts? Yeah. Okay, good. So think of your own tradition, and tradition can be where your ancestors came from, your religion, or the tradition of educators. How you do to promote that. It says connection and relationships, but now we want to focus on those that allow that feeling of engagement. Like what are the opportunities for engagement in the work that you do? Okay. So again, we'll take 4 or 5 minutes, and then we'll have a larger group discussion. Second choice? Clap? Okay. But if you hear my voice, clap your hands. If you're ready to talk more, clap your hands twice. And if you think the principals had a good idea, clap for them. Yay! So I wandered around and I heard a few different themes that came out. So I just want to call on people by theme this time. So who talked about food in some way? All right. So anyone want to share what the group talked about food? Yes.
We were all just talking about like the tradition we have in our own families, where we have like family dinner. So in my house, I have a blended family with a multiple age range of kids. But every Monday night, it doesn't matter if you go to college, if you work, like you have to be home for this. And just creating that, and all of us have very similar stories where like now that kids are adults, they still gravitate towards those, come together once a week for dinner.
Anyone else? Food. Who had their hands up for food? I got a lot of hands. Over there.
We had a doc that we were working with, and we asked him to help us on the opioid issue, and the only way he'd do it is if we took him to breakfast at 7.
Good for you. And how was that?
It was good. He said, if you're going to waste my time with all your silly meetings, forget it, but at least I can get a breakfast out of it.
Right, but it is true. When you want to work with someone, breaking bread is an ancient thing that you do together. Good. Anyone else? Yes.
We see a big increase in parental or family attendance at events when food is offered.
Yeah.
Food and babysitting.
Yeah.
If you can offer those two things, people will come.
Yeah. Yeah, when I was a resident, we had these weekly meetings, and sometimes we had pizza and sometimes we didn't. And my exasperated chief resident once made a comment that if God herself came and talked about design considerations for the human being, people wouldn't come unless there was pizza.
Some for carbs.
So I'm not sure, that never got tested. Other comments about food and engagement? Yes?
You know, more than just the food being there, it's the idea of sitting down. You know, I think you used the phrase breaking bread. I think it implies that you need to relate to people, so you need to sit down in the middle of them. We at our church do an in-house community fellowship meal every month, but recently we've taken to going on the road to one of the local housing projects where there's a number of elderly folks, and beyond just providing food and some entertainment, we literally sit down in the middle and start to chat, and it's one of the most rewarding things that you can do, because you learn about what you don't know.
Right.
And then you learn about some things, and other people might learn about what you do know, and it's just a great exchange.
I love to hear that, and obviously it means something to you, but teenagers can have that same experience. They can go to homes for the elderly or whatever, and help people and sit and meet them. So that was a good segue. Anyone else talk about spirituality in any way, or faith? Yes? Yep. Anyone? Someone? You're being volunteered there.
The church that we're talking about.
Okay. Anyone want to help them out? Save them from embarrassment?
Well, I guess in different topics that church plays sometimes an instrumental role in these ceremonies, and keeping sometimes not even your traditional church, but you may seek out a church in your neighborhood or your town that offers more sort of supportive things. So they have like a youth group, a ministry, and one for the younger, and maybe others for the adults, so you can engage in fellowship with the older folks, more your age group, and the children can fellowship with the other children and things like that, and that can create sort of community too. And support for the families as well. Sometimes they're without support.
Yeah, it's a really important point, because there are times in our lives when each of us can provide support and each of us need support. So my congregation reaches out to people who've lost someone, or they have a new baby, all kinds of things that happen, that you can actually engage people in that community effort. And it definitely creates a community through that engagement. And then moving right along from faith and spirituality to social media, at least one group talked about social media, and I'm dying to hear about their conclusions. That's your cue. Does social media help with engagement?
We were looking for possibly some positive things.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things you mentioned was using it for families who are distant, with an elder family member who's getting older, which on other states, so once a week they do family FaceTime basically, and they make sure that they carve it out just like the dinner, even though they're in other states.
And elderly, you mean over 40? Sorry, I couldn't resist. So, but I think that's really powerful.
A physician still working he's in his 80s. That's true.
No, but I think it's really true, because we often live in families that are spread out. And in my care for immigrant families, they often use social media to connect to people back in their home country. Which, if you're a history buff, that's a little faster than sending letters back and waiting for the ship to get the letter and then get the return. But I think that for people to engage with their own culture and their own families, social media provides a really, I think you hit on something really important. People now being more spread out. Yeah.
Just echoing off of that, I know me personally, FaceTime I feel so awkward because it's like in face. But I have a large family. I have 5 brothers, my two parents. So to stay in contact, because we are all spread out, we have a family group chat that goes on constantly, which can be annoying.
Oh shoot!
But that way,
somebody deletes.
Yeah, that way we're all in contact always, and then coming together at least once a month for dinner. That's kind of going off the social media type thing.
And any other themes that came out that are worth sharing? Yes.
Well, I'm associated with NAMI. I don't know if anyone knows what NAMI is, but it's the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And we have programming for parents, which is a basics program, which is a 8-week teaching, facilitating. We facilitate a program for 8 weeks, teaching parents about children, IEPs, and things of that sort. And they also have peer-to-peer, which is also, that's an 8-week program for peers, for children of a certain age to connect with one another. And then there's a connection group as well. So within the community, if you reach out, if anyone is having difficulty with mental health issues, NAMI would be the place to go to find additional information and help along those lines.
That's great. I think it provides a lot of opportunities for engagement for both the parents and the kids to help each other when they need it. And this is like not novel. I mean, Alcoholics Anonymous has buddies, and I'm sure it helps the buddies to stay sober, to be responsible for somebody else as well.
Can I also add to that, for the people who are here for schools and elementary schools and middle schools, there's also a program called Students for Allies, which you can have come into your school, and they will talk about mental health conditions and what to look for the students.
So just take a minute and write down some your take-home, your homework for ideas you have for your own workplace or your own work. And then we'll go on to the fourth and last pillar, and then we get to the most exciting part, which is really trying to bring this home to the phases of work that we do. What it is, but it turns out there are also measures. Who works in a preschool environment? Anybody? Okay, just me. But there are measures for social emotional competence, and I just pulled out one that's a standard measure for 2-year-olds. You can think about this, how it applies to older kids. So for a 2-year-old, does your child look at you when you talk to him? Does your child laugh and smile when you play? Does your child greet and say hello to familiar adults? Does your child check to make sure you're near or exploring new places? Does your child hurt other children, adults, or animals? So there are systematic ways through different ages when you can observe someone and begin to figure out how they're doing on social and emotional competence, where they need a little more scaffolding or structure around that. And I think that educators probably get this a little bit, but there's no MCAS for social and emotional competence. But it's probably the thing that matters so much for our performance, not just on the test, but how we do in life, and where our ability to complete tasks, to have loving relationships, to do all those things that we need, to work in teams. It's a really important concept. And this slide talks out the National Association of Educators of Young Children has whole toolbooks about this for little kids. And I'm going to guess that there are similar tools for helping older children, whether they're involved in middle school, high school, whatever. And so what I want to do is skip through this one a little bit, but just to think for a moment about how we can create opportunities to develop social and emotional competence. And there are things that go on in society all the time. We have ceremonies to mark life events, whether it's birth, marriage, death, coming of age, whatever. We talked a lot about the family life things, and there were several conversations about family meals. And certainly family meals give you an opportunity to learn to hear about social emotional competence, because if you don't do it right, your big sister will tell you. Not that I have a big sister who would ever tell me that. From programming interventions, I think this is a harder one to get around programming, but I think it's important to think about this as well. And certainly workplace policies provide scaffolding so that people who may lack some boundaries have rules that they can rely on and hopefully eventually learn some of their own social and emotional competence. Other comments about this pillar? Okay. So what I want to do in the remaining time is talk about kind of what is a path? How do you get from here to there? And we touched on it a little bit, but what I've thought about in conversations is most of our work, people in services, there's like really 4 things we have to think about. One is initial intake or assessment. We first run into a child and a family. The next is how we create programming that creates positive experiences. We've been touching on that a little bit. I want to call that out. And then what I call bringing out the positive in all of us. But how do you talk with someone? How do you train yourself mentally to see, particularly people who have had traumatic experiences and maybe in your face about it, how do you see through that? And then how do we know if what we're doing is having an effect? So we're going to spend about 15 minutes on this, and there'll be time for questions and discussion. So first, we started nationally, there's more of an interest in ACES screening, and I believe the state of California is going to be starting mandating ACES screening. The reasons why ACES screening is sort of obvious. One is high ACES are a risk factor for a variety of outcomes. And the second is there's a standard screening tool. So if you decide to do ACES screening, you can go to the Center for Youth Wellness website or the CDC's website or somebody else's website and download a standard tool. So it's pretty easy and you get something. We're much earlier in our development of positive childhood experiences. And I shared with you what we've done in Wisconsin with that national survey. But we think that these screens, and there are others, there's something called ACES, all kinds of things that are out there now. But the idea of all of these is when we're doing the initial assessment to get a more complete picture of our clients. And it supports relationship building. Because if you say to somebody, what are the 12 horrible, most embarrassing, most shameful things that ever had in your life? Right? You look at me like that. But if you say, wow, so nice to see you here today, what contributed to your success and you being your relationship's different, right? And a complete relationship, a healing relationship has to involve both. And so from a one-to-one basis for frontline people, this is really important. Thank you for sitting in the front row. Yes.
So I once, this is a couple of years ago, looked at the ACES screening tool.
Mm-hmm.
And this is when I worked with Healthy Families, the Parent Team program. And some of the questions were like, have you ever been beaten?
Right.
Have you ever, I just think they're hard questions.
They're very hard questions.
And you're supposed, like, I know Healthy Families, I think, want us to ask it, like one of the first visits, and you don't have a relationship yet.
Yeah.
And I just worry about what, and then you leave the house.
Yeah.
And you might have left that person traumatized.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I'm not really happy about ACES screening, and I think that my little thought exercise with the person in the front row, whose name is Linda, really illustrates that. These are really hard things to talk to someone about, and then you're kind of left high and dry. So what we're doing with Healthy Families Massachusetts to be responsive to Healthy Families America is working with Sarita, and we're pilot testing an intake instrument that asks about positive and adverse childhood experiences. And the initial pilots look really great, that the frontline caregivers like it better, and their clients like it, because they feel like someone's trying to understand me, rather than someone's trying to label me. Because the reality is that both kinds of experiences are relevant. So I'm really nervous about the widespread ACES screening, for all the reasons you said.
So
Yes.
who would be doing the screening?
I don't think that I'm really not really advocating for it, but there's pressure, or there's a movement to have doctors screen for it. There's a movement to have home visitors screen for these. So there's a lot of people discussing who should be screening for ACEs.
So I think that for whoever's doing it, they have to make a piece of it be that, here's this great resource or whatever,
Right.
like, and because,
Yeah.
if they're having behavioral health issues and stuff, it's really hard to, you leave them a lot of times stranded because it's so hard to find a good provider or
Yeah.
whatever.
Hold that thought, so we're going to get to that in a second. Okay, so the positive childhood experiences, these are the 7 items that we're now piloting with Healthy Families Massachusetts. How often did your family stood by you? Did your family enable you to talk about your feelings as an adult in your household who made you feel safe and protected? Did you enjoy community traditions? How often you feel supported by your friends? Did you feel a sense of belonging at school? And were there at least two adults other than your parents who took a genuine interest in you? And this has some face validity because we've done it with thousands of people. It's based on a well-known WHO-sponsored resilience measure. And I mentioned the World Health Organization because we tried to pick one that was going to be culturally vanilla, that it wasn't particularly about things that resonate with one culture or another, which of course is WHO's core business because there are, I don't know how many hundreds of countries. It's associated with adult mental health. We know it can mitigate ACEs, and so we're working on that, and Sarita Rogers is leading that pilot. And I hope that Healthy Families Massachusetts will be taking this on soon, and we'll be looking at it more, just as a way to do an intake that's sensitive to not just the bad things that happen to you. And not to pick on the ACEs survey alone, because how many times do we ask people about their, whether they have domestic violence at home, whether they've been incarcerated, I mean, kind of bad stuff, right? But we don't ask them about like how did you get to be here today? What were there community traditions that you enjoyed? Did you have someone who cared about you? Did you have a mentor as you were growing up? All of which are important, and we can use that to help people reinvent what they're doing. So, programming towards positive experiences, we talked about this when we, a lot already. Family-based activities, play opportunities for children, high-quality early childhood education, can't say that often enough. Other organizations that may be there, libraries, community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, parks, and a lot of organizations now sponsor parent cafes, which I'd be happy to talk with you. I know Mass Children's Trust sponsors those, others do. But you get a chance for parents to engage because the answers come from the parents, not from the facilitators. I want to talk for a minute, and I think we sort of got there, about what this means in practice. So when I was at Boston Medical Center, I took care of mothers who had been in treatment for opioid addiction during pregnancy in a program called Respect, and then they had the baby, and as a pediatrician, I got a chance to work with them. And so I want you to think with me, imagine that you had someone, we'll call her Ms. S. She's now been sober for 3 years. She went to a community event, and at that community event, they did ACEs screening as a community. She said her score was 5, and now she's worried how this will affect your 2-year-old son. So thinking about your knowledge of positive experiences, how would you talk with her? Because she's concerned about the intergenerational transfer of trauma, which means because she had a tough childhood, and she obviously had a problem with sobriety that she's conquered now, at least for the time. So how do you talk to her about this to give her some hope for the future? Anybody? Yes, and then 1, 2.
Focus on her own positive experience, number one, but then the types of positive experiences that she can create for her son.
Do you hear that? Her own positive experiences and the positive experiences that she can create for her son. There was another comment? Yes.
Because I've heard this before, somebody else's answer stuck out to me, and I still remember it, but so this is my own saying. They just said, wow, you've been sober your child's entire life. That's incredible. And that just, I still remember that, and just how to say that to somebody. It must have made her feel so good.
Yep. It's a really wonderful thing. So when I took care of a mom who came to me with her kid as an infant through this program, before I walked in the exam room, I would remind myself of 3 things. One is when she was pregnant, she had decided to carry the pregnancy to term. She had gotten into recovery or stayed in recovery through her pregnancy, and she had fought like hell to keep the child. So if I made myself remember those things, then I walked into a room thinking, here I am, I'm about to talk with a really courageous person who's conquered a lot of stuff to get here today. That didn't mean that I was like glossing over the fact that she had substance use disorder. It meant that I was also seeing the flip side, and that's a mental exercise that's so important to do that really comes out of these positive experiences, because once you do that, you can talk with someone about what you've been sober your child's whole life. What helped you with that? And what kind of experiences do you want your child to have going forward? And how can we help you with all those things we talked about playing and relationships and engagement, so your child can have those. Very powerful. Parents, almost all parents want to be really good parents. That's a real advantage we have. And in general, in hope-informed care, awareness, remember, and trauma-informed people talk about this all the time, being a parent brings back memories of your own childhood. Those memories shouldn't, and for almost everybody, doesn't include only trauma. So you can start looking for some of those other experiences. Reassurance, we talked about in the last case, and you said it really well, that history is not destiny, that what's happened is the past, and we can work together to create positive experiences for your child. I spent a lot of time with you earlier talking about how the brain redevelops and rewires. Healing is possible. If someone can heal from a stroke, if someone can heal from all these things, they can heal. And there's no shame in getting help. Whether help is informal or help or mental health services or medications, there's no shame in that. That we now know that our brains are capable of healing. We are not, my mother, may she rest in peace, can no longer heal. But the rest of us can. And we can work with our families to invent better ways to raise children. So when you're working with a person who had a traumatic experiences in childhood, or toxic stress, or adversity, whatever, they can invent a different way. They may need more support if their memories aren't so easy to replicate, or they don't want to, but they're capable of doing it. And it's really wonderful to keep these things in mind. And so this is sort of what we think is another way to think about trauma-informed care, but to flip it around. So what you're looking at is the positive in all of us that we can all bring to what we're doing. And finally, in all of our work, we need to figure out whether it's working. And first, I had you write down little things to do, and some of them are going to be like world-changing, some of them may be very small things. Improvements always start with small tests of change. You try with a small group of people, with a really contained thing, so you can experiment, so you're not rolling something out to an entire district, everybody all at once, until you have some confidence that it might work. Parents express their opinions, and they can express through talking with them, through conducting surveys, but one of the things that's most powerful is, do they show up? And if they show up, do they bring their friends? And those are clearly reasonable outcome measures for when we're trying to integrate the health effects of positive experiences into our work. Because unlike showing up for treatment or a screening for something shameful, there should be some joy and some benefit and engagement from these experiences, so that being able to attract and retain parents is really important. And the other thing that I think we pay attention to, and hopefully we all do already, and if we don't, we could, is pay attention to frontline workers' opinion and satisfaction. So one of the things about ACES screening in Healthy Families Massachusetts was that the frontline people didn't want to do it because it was traumatizing to them, because many of us have had experiences that they don't want to relive 3 times a day as they're asking those questions, and they thought it stigmatized and labeled the people they were their clients, and they seemed to be much happier with asking about adversity and positive experience at the same time. They matter. People who choose this work have chosen it for a reason, and their opinions and their experience and their own job satisfaction are really important. And they can't be the only guidepost, but they're an important one. And I hope to come back with you in a couple of years and tell you that we have the MCAS for positive assessments, for positive experiences, and we'll sit everyone down in a room for 17 hours, have them fill out multiple choice tests.
Sounds relevant.
Yeah. No, I think it's skepticism. I think it's really hard to figure out exactly what the outcomes are, because for all of us, the outcomes for the children or adolescents we work with, we want them to be better adjusted, happier 30-year-olds. And we want to know about that tomorrow. And that's hard. So these are my ideas, and you guys may have your own ideas. How to tell if, as you begin to take some of the ideas from your notepads into real life, whether it's working or not. I want to just close by going through what we talked about today. We all came into this because of this, the spirit that we're working, and I firmly believe that health outcomes of positive experiences captures this, our own spirit of successful practice. We went through science, talked about how to promote healthy development, prevent abuse and neglect, and most important, how positive experiences can break the link between adverse experiences and toxic stress. And I think, and I hope I've convinced you, that we already know enough to consciously and systematically begin to incorporate this thinking into our work. It won't be easy. It's not the way things have been done. And we need, of course, to do more research because we need better standard language and measures so that we can all talk about it, in less than 2 hours. And I just want to finish with 2 quotes from people who undoubtedly never met each other. Very famously, at the end of the 19th century, Frederick Douglass said, "It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." That's probably why we're all doing the work we're doing. And then more recently, the Dalai Lama said, in order to carry a positive action, we must develop here a positive vision. And that's the challenge for all of us and the very hard work we do with people who are facing all sorts of challenges to maintain a positive vision about what they're experiencing, what they can experience, and what we can do in our own work. Thank you.